This is Jerry Fry, audio historian of Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. The following is the professional history of a PPB member told by himself in his own fashion on October the 5th of 2009. These interviews are being recorded in order to compile firsthand a living history of the members of our organization and stories of their professional experiences. Many of our members began in what is called the golden age of radio and television, and this is an attempt to preserve as much data as possible for succeeding generations. This recording is not intended for broadcast without first obtaining permission from Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters. With me today in Burbank at the Toluca Lake Tennis Club is Commander Chuck Street, known in this area for many, many years as one of the leading helicopter traffic reporters of the area. We couldn't live without you, Chuck, because driving these freeways, you go out of your mind if you don't know what's ahead of you and what to expect. You've been doing it for a few years now, 27?
Almost 26 years, and I have an opportunity to speak before a lot of groups, and I talk about this being the information age.
Yeah.
And so traffic information is very important so people can make decisions about how to get to work or how to get to school, how to get to their destination. So you feel like you're doing something that's helpful.
It is helpful because without that kind of advice, I think people would go crazy trying to figure out what to do when they come across a sudden blockage in traffic.
True.
I'm amazed actually at some people that I've talked to that never listen to radio. They have their own CDs or whatever, and therefore they don't hear this kind of information. When did you first get into the helicopter business?
Well, of course, I was a pilot first. It was 32 years ago. 32 years ago, I became an airplane pilot first. And
how did that happen? Were you in the service or?
Was never in the military. I drew a good lottery number. This was towards the end of the Vietnam War, and at that time we knew we were trying to get out of there, so I didn't want to get stuck in Vietnam. Although people in my age group, a lot of them did go. I stayed in college, had a college deferment, and then as soon as I drew a good lottery number, I dropped out of college, much to my parents' disappointment, and then got into radio as a disc jockey. But to get back to your question, prior to getting into radio, I went to a school in Huntington Beach. It was called the William B. Ogden Radio Operational Engineering School, which was kind of a highfalutin name for a cram school where they poured a lot of knowledge in your head about electronics so that you could take a test to get an FCC first-class radio telephone license, which made it a lot easier for you to get a job because you had that license.
Sure.
Now, outside the school was an airstrip. It was called Meadowlark Airport, and I remember being at that school where we went to classes 7 days a week, and at night standing on the balcony and looking at that airstrip, and dreaming of someday learning how to fly. So a few years later, I was able to come back to that very airstrip and then get an airplane rating. In those days, it was cheaper to get an airplane rating first and then transition into helicopters, and that's exactly what I did. Although I ended up liking airplane flying a lot more than I thought I would. But a year after getting my airplane pilot certificate, I went over to Long Beach Airport and got a helicopter rating, which was really what I was after. Anyway, learning how to fly helicopters was a chance to put radio and flying together. Because I had two loves, flying and broadcasting, and that was a great way to be able to do both. So I started in college radio at San Bernardino Valley College, and I was on the campus FM station. I wasn't very interested in TV, even though they had a TV station. I'd go over there sometimes, but it just didn't seem to be as much fun.
What year would this have been?
This is about 1969, 1970. And I started in the summer, right after I graduated from high school, and I used to spend literally 10 to 12 hours a day at the campus radio station. And at that time, they used to have a 5-minute newscast at the top of every hour, and then at 12 noon they had a 15-minute newscast, and then at 6 p.m. they had another 15-minute newscast. So what I would do is hang around the newsroom and prepare for the next broadcast, because half the time the students wouldn't show up to do their newscast.
Really?
And so I was ready if they didn't show, and half the time they didn't. So then I went on the air for them, because I had prepared it, and then it was a chance to be really on the radio. We probably only had 7 listeners at the time, but it was real radio.
It was radio.
You know, so I had that chance, and I just sort of pretended like there were a million people listening, and there weren't that many. But still, it was the discipline of meeting a deadline, and then having a chance to be on the air. And sometimes the person would show up at the last minute, and I would just hand them the copy that I'd already edited and prepared, and they just go in and use it.
Yeah.
So that was a great opportunity, a great experience to just to practice being on the radio. I did some disc jockey shows too. But it was the easiest way to get on the air was news, because nobody was interested in news, at least not that many people. And to me, I thought there was an urgency to the news, that people needed to have this information. I got excited because there was a deadline, and to be on the air and to be prepared. And I think it was great. That whole experience was great preparation for what I do now.
Absolutely. Got you into the aura of being able to present news as it happens.
Exactly. And, we had like an AP wire
Yeah.
teletype machine there, and then I used to bring in the newspaper too, and then clip stories out of that so we could have some local news. Occasionally there was a story that came over the wire that had to do with the Inland Empire, but not many. But I would, and so that was a chance to kind of type and learn how to prepare local news stories. And
it was always kind of fun. I remember running to the wire machine and looking at some story coming across and realizing you may be one of the first guys in the world to know what's happening, because here's the story right now.
That was exciting.
Yeah.
You were cutting edge, and then you felt like you had this opportunity to share that news with the listeners.
That's right.
And again, I used to sort of think that people were listening, lots of people. I know they had the station on over at the campus center, at the student center, and I think they listened sometimes. But
let's go back to the beginning of your life. You mentioned San Bernardino. That's
Right.
where you were born?
That's right. Born and raised in San Bernardino. And when I was a young kid, there was a TV show on called Whirlybirds. It was about two pilots who flew this bubble-type helicopter, Korean War vintage helicopter. I know the series was filmed here in Los Angeles. In fact, it was filmed right here in Burbank, within a couple of miles of where we are right now. And Whirlybirds was about these 2 pilots who had a charter operation who always seemed to be getting involved in these adventures. You know, rescuing people, chasing bank robbers, finding lost hikers, flying a serum that would save somebody's life. And so I fell in love with the helicopter because of what it could do and its magical capabilities. I mean, it could do so much more than an airplane could. I mean, it could hover in midair, it could fly backwards, it could fly sideways, it could land almost anywhere.
Sure.
In fact, I used to have little fantasies when I was growing up about having my own helicopter and keeping it in my backyard and flying to school.
Oh, man.
And landing out on the playground, and then maybe after school taking off in my own personal helicopter and then flying over to my girlfriend's house, which was probably only a few blocks away, hovering above her backyard, drop a rope ladder down, just like I'd seen on Whirlybirds, and then invite her up for a flight around town. You know, I had those little fantasies. So I just never really got over that show, Whirlybirds. And of course, I was a big fan of Sky King, which I know started on radio, but it was on television when I was a kid. And so it's sponsored by Nabisco. And I was just fascinated with flying. Although as a kid, we didn't know anybody who was a pilot. I mean, our family didn't have any friends who had airplanes or know anybody who had airplanes. All I could do was sort of dream about getting into it someday.
Your father and mother were from where?
My father was born in Canada, but as an infant came to Los Angeles and kind of grew up near the Coliseum in what you call South Central Los Angeles. He talks about when there were open spaces out there, even an airstrip near Western Avenue.
Really?
And in fact, one of the first houses they rented when they came here was in the parking lot of the Los Angeles Coliseum. It was one of the last to be raised prior to the 1932 Olympic Games. And my father has vivid memories of the Olympic Village around the Coliseum in what's now Exposition Park. The athletes stayed in tents around the Coliseum, and then some of the other athletes were up at Baldwin Hills. You know,
I see.
and he talks about that. So anyway, back growing up in San Bernardino, when I was 11 years old, there was a station that came on the air out there called K-Men, K-M-E-N. And Prior to that time, it was a sleepy little radio station that had no ratings. There was one rock and roll top 40 station out there, KFXM, that had probably as many commercials as they had records. So because they had no competition. So K-Man came on the air in 1962, March of 1962, and just was a sensation from day one. They had radio personalities who were just that, real personalities. They had a lot of funny ideas. They played great songs. They did a lot of promotions in the community. In fact, some of the guys who were at that station went on to much bigger things. Bill Watson was the program director, who eventually went on to run RKO with Bill Drake and 93 KHJ. But they came through San Bernardino, and within 3 months the station was number one. And they went from no listeners to being number one in 3 months, and within 10 or 12 months they had 70 shares.
Wow.
Another 70% of people listening to radio were listening to this station. So I was absolutely blown over by this station. The creativity that happened on the air, just the excitement they were able to create. So I fell in love with radio. Anyway, I was absolutely enthralled with this radio station, KMAN 129 Radio, and within a short time, I just decided that I wanted to be on the radio because I saw these disc jockeys who were true celebrities in the town. They seemed to drive hot cars and always be surrounded by nice-looking girls. And what they did seemed to be fun. They were only on the air for 3 hours at a time, and then seemed to get paid well. And they got free tickets to concerts and met a lot of celebrities and were photographed with celebrities. So at that time, I decided that I wanted to become a successful radio broadcaster and fly helicopters on the side.
Uh-huh.
I'd never heard of a thing called a traffic reporter in those days.
No.
In the early 60s. But of course I told my dad that I wanted to get into radio, and my dad was against it because he had been in radio in central Wisconsin, and he was convinced that radio was filled with flakes,
Oh, really?
unstable people.
Not just cereal flakes, but real flakes.
Real flakes, yeah. He just said it's not a very stable business, and
You know what? He was right.
he was right. He really was right. So he kind of resisted it. He thought I should get into something more steady and more stable. But he always had a fascination for radio himself, growing up here in Los Angeles. And he used to go down to, Columbia Square and get into some of the shows. And when he went to Pasadena City College, he was on the campus radio station. Mm-hmm. And then the World War II broke out, and he went into the Army and eventually ended up in the Army Air Corps as like an air traffic controller up in the Aleutian Islands. When he was there, he met a fellow from central Wisconsin who had been a radio station like operations manager. And they became friends, and the fellow kept saying to my dad, after the war, come and look me up in central Wisconsin, and I'll give you a job on the radio. So after the war ended, my dad just did that. He did just that thing. And thank God he did, because that's where he met my mom. My dad at that time kind of looked like Clark Gable, had a mustache, and was sort of a dashing-looking fellow from Los Angeles, and was on the radio and had made an impact while he was there in this little town of Stevens Point, Wisconsin, near Wausau. And he met my mom, who I think had just gotten out of high school, and within probably a year and a half or so they were married and came out to California. My mom just wanted to get away from the cold weather.
Oh, yeah.
And so she wanted to go to Los Angeles with my dad, and my dad ended up taking a job in sales out in the San Bernardino area. He couldn't get on the radio because there were just no openings. There were a lot of war guys who were back, and so there were no openings, and he had a family to feed.
Sure.
And so that's how he ended up in the Inland Empire. He was like a territory manager, in sales.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so I decided I was going to be a successful radio personality and fly helicopters on the side. After graduating from high school, I went to the campus radio station at San Bernardino Valley College, drew a good lottery number, and then dropped out of college. And part of that was by the prompting of a person who worked on K-Man, who said, look, you don't need a college degree to be a disc jockey.
That's right.
You just need to put together a good tape and get a job. Mm-hmm. You don't need a college degree. Of course, that was music to my ears because I thought just about everything else about college was boring, except the radio station and some of the girls who were on the campus. So I did drop out of college. Both my parents were very disappointed. And this fellow helped me put together an audition tape and took me on the road up Highway 99, dropped off some tapes like in Bakersfield, Fresno, Modesto, Merced, and as I recall, Monterey. And in Merced, I'd met a fellow who used to go to the college where I went. He was the program director, and we had a nice visit. And he called me a few days later after I got back to San Bernardino. I said, "Look, we like your tape. We're going to give you a chance. We have an opening." And I said, "Well, who's?" "Oh, yeah, somebody left." He said, "Yes, I'm leaving."
Oh, he's leaving.
So apparently he had, I wasn't taking his job as program director, but he had gotten a job in some larger city. And so I started on KYOS in Merced, Chaos. And it was a small station, but they played what you might call chicken rock. So I worked the 9 to 2 p.m. shift, the midday shift, and we played records, and it was kind of exciting. I remember when we came up to the Christmas break, we were playing 30 minutes an hour of commercials and 30 minutes of songs. Again, it was they were making money, and I think at that point I didn't quite realize why those towers were in that cow pasture.
Yeah.
It was to make money. So I remember complaining to the owner of the station about how could you do this, play so many commercials, you're ripping off the audience, which he didn't want to hear.
No.
In fact,
did you have to read a lot of those commercials yourself?
I did read some of those commercials, and some of the other jocks they voiced them as well. But I think the thing that did me in it, being an idealistic person, I remember one of the owners of the station was a very religious sort of fellow from Santa Barbara, and he took 2 pieces of music off of the radio. One was by George Harrison called "My Sweet Lord," the other one by Carlos Santana called "Black Magic Woman." So I asked the owner, I said, "Why would you take these top 10 songs off of the radio? You're depriving the masses of this great music." And he said, "Well, if you must know, I took George Harrison's song off because in the chorus it said, 'Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna.'
Oh.
That's unchristian, and nothing like that's going to be on my radio station." And I said, "What about the other one?" He said, "Because it's too hard." This was Black Magic Woman. He didn't like that either. So I kind of protested, and within 2 days I was let go.
Oh,
So
surprise, surprise.
So I learned a quick lesson about, first of all, why radio is there in the first place, to make money, and also, it's the owner's station. He can do what he wants.
Yeah.
It should be yes, sir.
We don't serve the audience, we serve the owner.
Yeah, that's right. That was a hard lesson to learn. So anyway, I think at that time I worked 6 days a week. I was making $600 a month. I was out of work for about a month, and then the fellow who talked me into dropping out of college had a job in Fresno. So he helped me get a job on KARM Radio, K-A-R-M Radio, which was a middle-of-the-road station in Fresno. It was a union shop. And I started doing weekends, 6 to midnight on Saturdays, 6 to midnight on Sundays, and then I would do some fill-in during vacations. But the starting pay was about $600 a month, and for working 2 days a week. And in fact, during the week, I used to work in a restaurant as in the kitchen.
Really?
And we used to listen to the station, and then I would be on the station on the weekends. I didn't tell those people, so they had no idea that the guy who was wearing that restaurant apron was also on the radio and on the weekends.
For heaven's sake.
In fact, finally they found out, and they just couldn't believe it. What was I doing working in this restaurant? But I
making all that money at the radio station.
Exactly. But
what union did you have to belong to there?
It was IBEW.
Yeah.
For some reason, it was an engineering union, IBEW.
It's the same one I had to belong to in Sacramento.
So you probably the same San Francisco local.
Yeah, that's right.
All of that.
Yep.
But anyway, so my friend, he got fired, and then I took over the weekday shifts from 7 to midnight, and I was making like $1,000 a month, which was, it was only 21 years old or something like that, and this is like 1971 or 72, and I couldn't believe I was making that sort of money. Well, everything was going along fine for about 10 months until I played a Cheech and Chong record that had clear utterance of the word MF. And it was one of those stupid things. I had the night shift, and the management, I didn't think was listening, and they weren't, but somebody complained about it.
You knew the words were in there?
Oh, I knew the words were in there. I just was, in fact, I played it a couple of times during the same week because, just pushing the envelope.
Sure.
And so the program director, who was a really nice guy, but also a barely functioning alcoholic. He called me into his office and he said, are you in the habit of auditioning all of the material that shows up in your show? And I said, well, usually. Let me be more specific. Did you last night play a song by Cheech and Chong that had... And he expected me to lie.
Oh, really?
I mean, he knew I did it, but he wanted me to say no. But being a Catholic boy, I answered yes.
Yeah.
He was stunned that I told him the truth. And so he looked at me in silence for about 10 or 12 seconds, which seemed like 60 seconds, and he said, you did? I said, I did. And he said, get out of my sight.
Oh, God.
So he told me to wait in the lobby because the union regulation said he had to type up a letter of why I was terminated. And I had that letter for a long time, that I was hereby terminated from employment from Carb Radio for knowingly jeopardizing the station's FCC license, specifically for playing a Cheech and Chong shun with clear utterance of the word MF.
Mm-hmm.
So then I was out of work again. So another painful lesson. So
How long was that? How long were you there?
I was only there about 10 months.
10 months.
So I was out of work for 4 months, and during that time, I went to work for Manpower. I was hauling aluminum pipe in the fields for Manpower. I worked on the Pepsi-Cola bottling line, lifting cases of empty glass bottles to put them into the washer. I unloaded tires from boxcars and lawnmowers from boxcars,
Oh, my gosh.
And so I had a lot of time to think about how irresponsible I'd been,
Yes, yes.
Well, a new manager came in there who was even more conservative than the previous one, and he gave me my job back.
He did?
I couldn't believe it, I remember when I went in to see him, I had an idea for a different format, and he just glared at me. And finally I said, I don't think you like me. And he said, wow, anybody who would do what you did was really irresponsible and stupid. So I said, you know what? You're absolutely right. I said, I have spent the last 4 months working physical labor, unloading boxcars, working the Pepsi-Cola bottling line. Do I have to pay for this mistake for my whole life? So he kind of looked at me and his face dissolved into a smile, and he gave me a job back. In fact, the program director was stunned when that happened. He thought I would. So anyway, I worked there for a few more months, got hired across town at another FM station. And boy, what a difference, because that was an AM.
Mm-hmm.
I never forget when I got hired at this FM station, they came looking for me because I'd done a night show that played rock music. In fact, real quickly, let me just tell you something. The guy who I replaced on Carm, who got fired after several months, he had taken this station. We used to play middle-of-the-road music. He came on at 7 o'clock. The management didn't listen to the station at night. So he took the station at night, rock.
Oh, he did?
And before, they didn't even notice.
Oh, my gosh.
So this went on for like 4 months or something like that, and then we got really good ratings at night, so then they had to stick with it. So...
Therefore, the audience did respond.
They did respond.
Yes.
So anyway... I went to across town to another station in Fresno that was stereo FM, and I remember the first time I put those Sennheiser headsets on, and with those foam ear pads, and the unbelievable difference in fidelity.
Sound.
Unbelievable, and I always had sort of a soft voice, but it made my voice sound for some reason bigger and richer. So that was really a kind of an eye-opening experience, is to be on FM.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, I think I was there only about 6 or 7 months, and then they decided to go automated, so I lost my job.
Oh, yes.
So
wonderful automation systems.
Yeah, so they went automated, and they offered to let me stay there and kind of run the automation, but I wasn't interested. So,
what was the format of that station? Rock?
It was album-oriented rock.
Album-oriented.
Yeah. So anyway, so I went back to San Bernardino and moved back home. With intention of getting back into radio, but I just didn't seem to get around to it. The one thing, I always thought I had a lot of good ideas, so I felt like I needed some formal sales training so that I could be better at presenting my ideas. So I went to work for Pacific Stereo, which was a stereo, they sold component stereos in Southern California and Northern California. Got a job there. And I did get a lot of great sales experience and business experience, and I was still around music and audio systems and all of that. During that time I was at Pacific Stereo, I kind of lived meagerly and drove a used car and lived in a small apartment in Long Beach. And then I started taking my flying lessons at that airstrip in Huntington Beach, right next to where that electronics school was. So that was kind of a dream come true.
Sure.
So a year later, I learned how to fly helicopters at Long Beach Airport. And around that same time, I left Pacific Stereo and started a car stereo installation business with another fellow from Pacific Stereo. I started that business in my driveway in front of my house because they would sell the stereos and send them to me, and I'd put them in with the person sitting in my living room watching TV.
Oh, for heaven's sake. Hey.
People have commented that I was putting in radios for my future listeners.
There you go.
By doing that, and that was supposed to be just a temporary thing. But my partner talked me into starting up, going serious, and we rented a big industrial building in Fountain Valley in Orange County, and eventually had a bunch of guys working for us. We had 3 locations, and after 5 years, I decided I really, really, really wanted to do something with my flying. So I talked 2 of my best friends into buying a helicopter with me, and we tried to get a charter business going, but it just, we're not making it. I was barely making the payments, making no money for myself. And so finally, one of the partners was getting impatient and said, we want out. This is going nowhere. But one of my other friends stayed in, a physician, Dr. Michael Morris. We were very close friends, and he had learned how to fly the helicopter, so had the other partner. He said, I'm going to stay in and just see what's going to happen. Interesting things happen when a person gets desperate. Mm-hmm. So I said, how much more desperate do I have to get? So I'd always had this dream of putting radio and flying together and being a traffic reporter. I had been mentored kind of by Bruce Wayne from KFI. I used to go over and see him once in a while at Fullerton Airport, and he was always very kind and encouraging. So I got to a point where I was in such bad shape, they were trying to repossess my car. In fact, if I took it somewhere, I made sure my belongings were not in it in case it was repossessed. I wanted to get my belongings back. I'd lock it in the garage at night. Yeah. I was 2 months behind on my condo payment. I borrowed about as much money as I could from my parents and friends, and it was looking pretty bleak. So around that same time, Rick Dees was starting to come on KISS FM. Mm-hmm. He'd been on the station for about a year or so and really was developing an audience. And this, of course, was 1983, about a year prior to the '84 Los Angeles Olympic Games. And over a pitcher of beer with another guy who was an associate of Rick Dees, we got this idea to fly up alongside Rick Dees' 19th floor radio studio window with a topless girl in the helicopter. At first, we both laughed about it, and I said, I can do that. So he said he knew a stripper. I mean, remember, this is inspired by beer.
Yeah.
So this was like on a Thursday or something like that. He said he was going to find this stripper. Well, and so the following Sunday, a couple of days later, I went to the beach with this gal I knew who was a chiropractor, a new chiropractor working in Fountain Valley. And we were talking about my situation. She said, what are you going to do? And I said, I don't know. We got this idea to fly up alongside Rick Dees' 19th floor radio studio window with a stripper. And maybe it'll get me an interview and I could get a job as a traffic reporter. So she said, after she'd had several glasses of wine, she said, well, I tell you what, if you can't find anybody, I'll do it.
Oh, my gosh.
So then I said, and she was a really nice-looking woman, and she was, was nice, very shapely, and very busty. And I said, look, you're a chiropractor, you're a professional. You can't do something like this. And she says, Chuck, it's radio. How are they going to know who I am? I'll wear sunglasses. So I said, you've been drinking a lot. I said, I'll tell you what, I'll call you tomorrow morning after you've sobered up, and then we'll talk about it again. Yeah. So I did. I called her in the afternoon on that Monday, and I said, well, are you serious? She said, I'm serious. Chuck, he said, you're a nice guy. This may get you a job. Plus, someday when I'm a grandma and people think that I'm an old fuddy-duddy, I'll tell them this story. I'll have this story. So 3 days later, on Wednesday, the 21st of June, in 1983, she comes to the airport and meets me. And we have 3 signs. made up. The first one said, "Park these under the goose." The second sign said, "Here's 2 for you." And the third sign said, "Burn your buns," which was the punchline for Rick when he would say, "Do a candid phone," a candid phone.
Uh-huh.
And she was wearing a light-colored elastic tube top, a windbreaker, black pants and pumps, and sunglasses. So I put the half photo door on the helicopter. We took off, and we're flying towards Hollywood, listening to Rick Dees, because we had a FM radio on the helicopter. Didn't do much talking. By then, I think we both realized that what we were going to do, it could be, anything could happen. I could lose my license for good. I could, who knows? We could get arrested. So we're listening to Rick Dees talking about the longest day of the year, the 21st of June, the summer solstice. We finally arrive over the Hollywood freeway at sunset. She slips off her windbreaker, slides the tube top around her waist, revealing her bare bosom, ready with a sign. Rick is talking about the longest day of the year. We hovered up in front of the Trizag building, 19 floors up, outside Rick's window, and he goes nuts. All hell breaks loose. He is describing exactly. He almost fell over backwards in his chair. We could see him, and then just across the glass was the news girl, Liz Fulton, and the sports guy, Charlie Wright. They're screaming. He's describing to the audience what's going on. You could hear the helicopter rotors in the background. We're holding the sign out that said, "Here's 2 for you." And what that meant was Rick had been promoting a comedy show he was putting on at the Spruce Goose in Long Beach in the Dome. Mm-hmm. And the Spruce Goose was so big you could park a DC-10 under each wing. And the comedy show was that night. Mm. So we say, "Park these under the goose," and of course there's Robin with her bare bosom holding this sign. He went nuts. So then we flew around the building again, and the second sign said, "Here's 2 for you." He's still laughing, describing. I hear him again. I hear, "Here they come, here they come." And then the third time it said, "Burn your buns," which was the punchline to Rick's candid phone type bits. They went nuts. They talked about it all morning long. What we didn't realize at the time is just around the other side of the building was KPRZ, and Gary Owens was on the air.
Playing a different kind of music.
Playing a different kind of music. So he saw us doing the same thing, and he was talking about it too. We didn't know that. I didn't even know about that station. And he was, in true Gary Owens fashion, he was saying, "We're finding out more about the girl. She's a union member, but she's not SAG." That's such a Gary Owens kind of line.
Yes, yes.
So anyway, remember Robin said, "Nobody will know who it's me. I'll be wearing sunglasses." We're flying back to Long Beach Airport, just excited, can't believe it worked even better than we thought. And then somehow Rick, I had mentioned this girl's name, Robin Phillips, one time to somebody I knew at the radio station. They went into the studio because they were saying, "We wonder who the girl is. Who's the girl?" And they remembered the name.
Oh my God.
And said her name on the radio. And it turns out that her boss was listening, a senior chiropractor shaving. And he wasn't that happy. He was not happy because he knew that, she was hanging out with me.
Yeah.
Went into the office that day and had a meeting about, "I can't believe you did this. You jeopardized. I can't believe you do. You're a professional, And so then they figured out what their story was going to be if somebody said anything, one of the patients. And then nothing.
Nothing?
So 2 weeks later, one of the patients said, "I was listening to Rick Dees on KISS FM a couple of weeks ago, and there was somebody flew up alongside his window, and they said there was Robin Phillips. Was that you?" He says, No.
Different one.
Different one.
You suppose Howard Stern was listening to any of this? Getting ideas for his show?
I haven't heard. But anyway, that night I ended up having dinner with Rick at the Queen Mary in Sir Winston's restaurant after the comedy show. He really thought it was funny, hilarious. I told him my idea. I said, "Look, you have the '84 Olympics coming up. They're predicting gridlock traffic. Let me be your traffic reporter." So he said, "Have you got a written proposal?" So I said, "I'll get one." 3 days later, I gave him a written proposal. He called me back a couple of days later and said, "I got you a 15-minute meeting with the boss, Wally Clark," who Rick called Waldo Cluck on the radio. He turned him into a character.
I remember that.
And there was a meeting with Wally Clark and Jerry DeFrancesco, the program director. It was supposed to be one of those meetings. All right, I'll talk to him for 15 minutes. That's all he's getting. The meeting lasted 90 minutes. And it was one of those things that I said all of the right things, and they had a need. So they called me back a few days later and said, let's try it for 3 months to see if, we like you, if you like us, and that's as much as we'll commit to it. So I remember that first month, I was so nervous. You could hear it on the air. In fact, the first few weeks, they recorded my reports because they were, this guy's not ready for prime time.
Yeah.
I'd been off the air for 10 years.
Sure. What were they doing for traffic reports up to this point?
Prior to that time, they had Ernie Garcia from the Highway Patrol calling on the phone, and they would record them. And sometimes those reports didn't get on the air for 20 minutes. So in L.A., things really change a lot in 20 minutes, so they were pretty stale. So one of the things I told Wally Clark during my meeting, I said, look, this is the most obvious last thing that you can do to improve the radio station. You've got new disc jockeys, you play great songs, you've got a new jingle package, you've got great promotions, you need a traffic reporter, the '84 Olympics are coming up, you need me. And they went for it,
Right.
And it's like, the first month I was so nervous you could hear it on the air. Ricky said, he's a little nervous, but he looks like Tom Selleck, He looks like Tom Selleck, and Rick is so good about the theater of the mind.
Yeah.
And the other thing is working with Gary Owens. They had me working with Gary, too, in the morning. Gary, fabulous, fabulous broadcaster. He would introduce you and build you up. I'd be doing my reports, and if you were faltering a little bit, he'd come in and kind of lift you up a little bit, and make you look good. And I'll always be grateful to Gary for that. So anyway, there were people during that first month who said, he isn't going to last a month. This guy's terrible. He's so nervous.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was 25 and a half years ago. I'm still there, and they're all gone.
They're all gone. That's right.
So I survived.
Now, you're flying the helicopter and reporting on the traffic.
And reporting.
How do you do that? I mean, I would think you would be so concerned with where the helicopter is going, you wouldn't have time to look down to see what was happening below you.
Well, it's multitasking to the max. Especially I started with a little tiny two-seater helicopter. I got to where I could fly it with my knees. You could kind of trim off the collective, which controls altitude, put the stick between your knees. I had a clipboard that I was writing and looking out. A lot of window space in the helicopter.
Yeah, sure.
So, boy, I was stressed. There's no doubt about it, because you're talking to the towers.
Yeah.
You're trying to fly the aircraft. You're trying to meet a deadline on both FM and AM. So it was pretty overwhelming. I remember that first few months. Man, I was stressed.
You're alone in the helicopter?
Alone in the helicopter in those days. So I worked from 6 to 9 a.m. in the mornings, and then 3 until 6 in the afternoons. And after I landed at 6 p.m., I would usually wipe down the helicopter, which took an hour, and fuel it up and all of that. So I got home about 8 o'clock, went to bed 45 minutes later, and then started all over again. It was pretty stressful. But it was a situation where, again, I was going to get evicted from my condo. I was going to lose my car. And I had to succeed. And the thing that really stuck in my mind is a classic thing from Homer that I heard Vin Scully say one time on the air. He talked about an army that they went from France. This is back in Roman times or something. They went from France to England, or England to France. And the general had the army burn all the boats on the beach, meaning there was no retreat. There was no retreat. You had to succeed. And so that's how I identify with that story,
Sure.
Had to succeed. I was humiliated at my reports the first few months, but then you just stuck with it.
No place to go but up.
Yeah.
Or down.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So anyway, been on KISS FM for nearly 26 years. Had a lot of interesting experiences. Met a lot of interesting people.
How was it when Rick Dees was let go, and the future of that particular show was in limbo for a while, as I recall?
Well, first of all, it was a shock. You just couldn't imagine KISS FM without Rick Dees.
No, he was an institution.
He was. He had been on the station for over 22 years. Rick called me I knew they were having contract problems. They were trying to negotiate a contract. I knew Rick's ratings were down a little bit. Found out later he wanted even more money. They were balking. New era in radio, new owners. They're saying, we're not going to do it. And so he called me on a Sunday morning. He never called me on Sundays. He said, Chuck, Tuesday's my last day. So I just want to thank you for being my amigo for all these years and being on the radio. I'll always be grateful, which I appreciated. He says they would not, I'd known for a month, they wouldn't let me say a word. Tuesday I can say, it's my last day, and I can say I'm going to be gone. And that's what had happened. You know, his Tuesday, he was suddenly gone. And I had met Ryan Seacrest several months before that. He was on one of the other Clear Channel stations. They had me fly him once and asked me what I thought of him. And I said, you know, he reminds me of Rick a lot in the early days. He's very enthusiastic, very gracious. Seems like a nice guy. But for 3 weeks after Rick left, I was the only live voice on KISS FM. In the morning.
In the morning.
Because they wanted to put some distance between Rick and Ryan so the audience wouldn't be mad at Ryan. So it was like being on a ghost ship. I mean, it's like walking down the decks and these cabin doors are banging open in the wind. It's like, hello, hello, anybody here? And I was getting almost no direction from management. I said, well, listen, I'm doing the traffic. Do you want me to do a weather report? Yeah, that sounds good. Do the weather, too.
So who was hosting the show?
Nobody.
Nobody. Just playing records?
They were just playing records and the commercials for 3 weeks, and it was just me.
Oh, my God.
So it's like, so we just want to put some distance between Rick and Ryan. So then they started with Ryan and started a big promotion giving away Scion automobiles, like one a day for 30 days, and Ryan Scions. And they really did a masterful job of kind of introducing Ryan to the audience. And the other thing is they had benched Rick a year early on his contract so that he couldn't work somewhere else. I mean, he'd already been paid for that whole year.
Yeah.
They didn't want Rick to show up across town at another station and then the whole audience follow him away from KISS. So he couldn't work, and they built up Ryan. So another thing about Ryan is that he came to me right after Rick was let go and said, Chuck, we've met before. I just want you to know that I've listened to you for years. I used to listen to you every day on the way to UCLA. I think you do a fabulous job, and I want you to stay on my team. Would you stay on my team? And I just said, sure, okay, great. So good for him and lucky for me,
Yes.
So I've been with him now almost 6 years with Ryan, and he's a great guy to work with. Of course, he's talk about multitasking.
Oh, wow. I don't know how he does it and stay
yeah.
alive. It's amazing.
But just some other, I know we're running out of time here and you got more than you need, but over the years, I mean, some of the exciting, in my helicopter, through KISS, I've flown Jack Nicholson twice, the actor who was a friend of Rick's. I've flown Kevin Costner. I've flown Cher. I've flown Oscar De La Hoya. I've flown Paris Hilton. More recently, Hugh Laurie from House. I did that for Pepsi, flew him from Burbank with his wife to California Speedway, where he was the Grand Marshal. What a neat guy he is. He's British, so different than his character on television, Who else? I'm forgetting. Michael Jackson, before the shit hit the fan.
Is that so?
KISS FM was going to do a promotion. They did a promotion, a charity event with him at Neverland Ranch. Called me on a Monday, asked if I could fly up there and take some people. We landed at Neverland. Michael Jackson was down there. He's wearing like pajamas or something, mismatching top and bottom, but he had a real firm handshake, and he asked me if I'd take him and his 2 little kids for a ride around Neverland. And he wanted to go look at this mountain, which he had named after his mother. He called it Mount Catherine.
Oh.
And it was just a normal conversation, like he was talking to kids. Kids weren't wearing masks like you see them in public.
Yeah.
And I landed there like 3 more times that same week. I had dinner in the kitchen there. We had a menu with a chef and all of that. And then he was really a nice guy, but I think they knew that the indictment was coming, and they were trying to build up some goodwill in the bank with that charity event. Oh. And about 2 months later, all of that headlines hit the paper, with that child molestation thing. But still, it was an interesting experience to meet him.
Wow.
Anyway, so that's been great. As far as the rest of it is, I took all of that kind of mini news experience from college radio and was able to do traffic. And I was up during the Northridge earthquake. I flew 10 and a half hours that day.
Big story there.
Oh my God, there was everywhere you looked, there was something going on. And then I've flown over the brush fires, the flooding, missed the O.J. Simpson slow speed chase because I was flying a Pepsi executive and his wife and my wife to a concert up in DeBoer. So that was one of the big regrets. I missed the O.J. Simpson slow-speed chase. There were 13 aircraft following that thing, and I wasn't one of them, so that was kind of a disappointment. But
You mentioned your wife. How did you and your wife get together?
my wife, Debbie, came to a promotion after I had started. I think I was on KISS FM about 6 months, and I went to a promotion in Huntington Beach with the helicopter, and we met and fell in love and had 3 kids together. I've been divorced now for almost 10 years. We were married 14 years. Been with a gal now for nearly 9 years, who my girlfriend. We don't live together, but just a fabulous gal.
Great.
You know, but my ex-wife was a fiery Italian, you know. I have kind of British heritage, so she was used to a lot of screaming in the house and kind of quiet around where I grew up.
Yeah.
So,
amazing.
anyway, so
Now, you have been in the television side of the house for how long?
almost forgot. Yeah, 4 years.
4 years.
About 4.5 years ago, my boss at KISS FM came to me and said, look, we got to figure out a way to make this cost less. Because, you know, you're flying a turbine helicopter, you know, it's very expensive. You do have a sponsor, Pepsi, but we're still paying a lot of money for this. We've got to make this pay for itself and then some. So I suggested that we perhaps hook up with a television station, and I suggested KTLA. We contacted them, and they jumped at it.
Did they?
The general manager at the time, Vinnie Malcolm, had been at KISS when I first started as a sales guy, had gone to KTLA as a sales guy and worked his way up to general manager. So he kind of believed in me and saw that I had been on a long time and had a following on KISS FM, and he said, let's see if we can transfer some of that equity over to television. So then they were able to get more money from Pepsi to not only pay for everything, and then they even, the radio station made money. So I was doing radio and television, which was that was a great opportunity. I mean, KTLA has such a rich, you know, Los Angeles history of being the first commercial television station west of the Mississippi. Grew up watching KTLA. Tom Hatton. When I come to these meetings and sit at the same table as Tom Hatton, I mean, what a thrill that is.
I guess.
The way it is to watch on KTLA. I remember people like Cleet Roberts, and KTLA had the first telecopter. And then, of course, you know, Gene Autry owned the station for such a long time, and I'd always been an admirer of Gene Autry because he was everything. Entertainer, businessman, entrepreneur. Musician. He was the full package, you know. So there are times when I walk on the lot at KTLA where I just get goosebumps thinking about all the history that's happened there. And so, again, being a part of this organization, I mean, Lloyd Sigmund is the guy that took me to the first meeting quite a few years ago.
Really?
Of course, Lloyd Sigmund was a silent partner of Gene Autry, and he kind of adopted a lot of us traffic reporters because he was the father of the SIG alert.
Right.
And ever since I came to these meetings, I again was just blown away at the quality of the people in the room. I mean, the history, all these such accomplished people.
Absolutely.
You know, so to be a part of this group and now on the board of directors is really an honor for me. I feel like the backbencher, you know, and to know people, you know, who I've met here in this group, including yourself. I mean, what a great honor that is.
It's a wide-ranging array of people some of whom you don't maybe recognize the name, and then you find out what they did. Like Art Alisi, for instance, who arranges for all the prizes on the quiz programs.
We probably saw his name in the credits at the end, but didn't know who he was.
That's correct.
But that's why I always enjoy your little things at the end of the board meetings, because you do such a fabulous job. And it's so interesting, this fellow who you're talking about, and maybe you're lucky enough to know 20% of what they did, and then you hear about all this other stuff and where they started. It's really interesting.
And it's amazing how many of them that I've talked to started life either in the East or in the Midwest and moved to Los Angeles to either get away from the cold, like your mother did, or came out here because they saw fruit trees growing in front yards.
Or the Rose Parade, when everybody's in
Parade.
T-shirts, you know, on January 1st. You know, I was going to tell you one thing about K-Men. I mean, I used to hang around there and look in the window while the radio guys were on. I used to dumpster dive. I mean, get into the dumpster to get news copy out and take it home when I was a young teenager just to read it, to practice reading copy, you know, into a tape recorder. So, you know, all of that pays off, you know, it all paid off. You know?
Sure does.
So,
and you never know along the way what is going to be magnified later in your life as being a turning point in your personal career.
That's right.
That's right.
Even to this day, I'll finish. When I see when I see AM radio towers, especially at night, with those sort of blinking red lights on AM radio towers, it still gives me a warm feeling inside because it's broadcasting.
Yeah.
You know, it's broadcasting. It's still exciting to me to see that magic that it emanates from those towers and is able to reach so many people. And that's magic.
And you avoid them very carefully, I'm sure.
In the helicopter,
flying
yeah.
in the helicopter.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
I'm very curious about the helicopter experience. You were the first on the air. Am I correct, in the LA area?
No.
For helicopter reporting?
No, the first one actually was, I think Kelly Lang was one of the first ones at KABC.
Going helicopter.
And she had a pilot, and so I think in those days she called herself Dawn O'Day.
Oh.
Dawn O'Day.
Okay.
On KABC. So then there was Captain Max Schumacher from KMPC. Gene Autry loved the Airwatch concept so much that he bought that whole program and brought it to KMPC.
Yes.
Lloyd Sigmund was the one that said, we got to get this. This is really a hot thing. Helicopter traffic reporting. So Captain Max Schumacher, who got killed near Dodger Stadium, he crashed into a police helicopter. Then there was Jim Hicklin. And then when I finally moved to Los Angeles, not as a radio person, but working at Pacific Stereo, I used to listen to Big John McElhaney on KMPC and Pamela McGinnis, who eventually I hired to fill in for me on KISS FM because I owned the helicopter. That was part of my responsibility, was to provide a replacement for myself. So to have Pamela McGinnis, who used to be on KMPC with that wonderful New Zealand accent, on the air filling in for me was just great. She was such a neat person.
Do the helicopters belong to you, or do you lease them?
No, I own the helicopter.
You own the helicopter.
Me and the bank.
Yeah.
Me and the bank.
That's a sizable investment right there.
It really is. It
Boy.
is. It's expensive. But I kind of like that because I have an independence from the radio station. I don't have to go in there and beg to buy a new fuel control or I need this hydraulic pump replaced. And they say, we haven't got the money in the budget this quarter. You'll have to wait.
Sure.
I've never had to worry about that. I just make the decision and then it's, I pay for it. So.
That's good. We have about 5 minutes or so left, Chuck. I wanted to ask you about, you make visitations to schools and have a program for them, do you not?
Yeah, I do. It's called the Sky's the Limit School Patrol. When I was a young kid, second grade, third grade, I was not a very good student and a horrible speller. Horrible speller. In fact, I was usually the first to sit down in spelling bees. And then I had a teacher in the third grade who would give a spelling test every Friday, and she would prepare us all week by giving us the words to study, but I didn't study them. So it'd be 25 words every Friday. I'd miss like 22.
Wow.
Sometimes I'd miss 25. And then you had to say your score out loud afterwards. She'd call your name from the roll book, so it was humiliating. I hated it. So during that summer between third and fourth grade, I discovered pleasure reading. Because before I thought reading was work.
Sure.
And no fun. It was school. But during the summer, my parents would take me to the library, and I started, checking out books on flying and other things I was interested in. So during that summer, I read over 30 books, and I started to read the newspaper, like the sports section, and hear the Dodgers score. So I go to the schools and tell that story, right? So when I came back to the fourth grade, I had a teacher that didn't give spelling tests quite as often, but my spelling scores rose dramatically. And I didn't know why at first, but it was because of the reading experience. I got used to seeing the words. I found it later on that I'm a very visual person. So the spelling scores, jumped up, and it was because of reading. And I just became a voracious reader ever since that time, and still am. Usually reading 2 or 3 books at the same time.
Wow.
Probably read 25 books a year easily. And then, lots of periodicals, news magazines, newspaper, and all that, kind of a news junkie. So that's an assembly that I do out in the schools. And over the last 25 years, I've probably been to over 400 schools, elementary schools. And I'll tell you what, when you come in and the kids are all out there sitting on the lawn, there's sometimes 1,200 of them, land the helicopter, come over to our PA system, you see banners up in the background, welcome, Commander Chuck, and you see these little kids looking up at you, kindergartners, and then, they have all the way up to 6th graders.
Sure.
And they're looking at you, they're so excited. It sometimes moistens my eyes to see these kids, how excited they are. So that's one of the more rewarding things that I do. They may forget my name, but they'll never forget the fact that a helicopter landed at their school.
Oh, no, that'll be talked about
You know,
for years.
Well, they'll remember it
Yep.
because it was something that happened, and they won't forget. So, and I
Yep.
tried to spread the word about what a difference reading made in my life. So that's what that's all about, is that assembly. Usually I do about, I think the most I've ever done in 1 year is about 26 appearances. It's not as easy to do because you have to get a permit from the state and get the site inspected. I'll probably end up with 15 this year, you know, landing at schools all over Southern California.
I think that's terrific.
It's a lot of fun. I'll have a kid come up to me sometimes and he'll say, "Are you Commander Chuck?" And I say, "Yeah." He said, "Well, you came to my school when I was in the 5th grade." I'm looking at a person in their 30s.
I know.
So,
My wife is a retired 5th grade school teacher, and she gets that all the time going to the Bonds or wherever, and, "Hi, Mrs. Fry, remember me?
But isn't that
I'm
great?
so-and-so from 20 years ago."
and she probably doesn't remember, but
She remembers the face, but not the name necessarily.
yeah, but look at the impact you had on that person.
That's right. That's
So
right.
that's important work, and it's an honor to be a part of it, to be able to do that,
Absolutely.
you know, to do that. You know.
How did the term commander get attached to your name?
You know, Rick Dees was a person who believed in handles. And he had a sports guy on the station, Charlie Wright, who we called
coach. That's
Charlie
right.
Wright. And then Liz Rugburns Fulton, he used to tease her about being at a party the night before. If she didn't come into work that day, he'd say she was recovering from rug burns at the Sherman Oaks Rug Burn Center. So he figured people would remember you more if you had a handle. So on the air, he asked me one time, he said, "We're going to give you some authority. I'm going to call you captain or commander. What's it going to be?" And I said, "Well, how about commander?" So he said, "All right, Commander Chuck Street." So it stuck. And my last name is my real name. I remember the first 6 months I worked at KISS FM. I'd see the sales manager once in a while, and he'd say, "Chuck Street, perfect, and it's your real name." So maybe it was meant to be. And my initials are CBS.
Oh, that's
so
right.
maybe it has to, meant to be in broadcasting.
Chuck
So.
Street reporting on the streets and byways and freeways of Southern California. You never get out to Ventura County, though, is it?
We have been there a couple of times, but not recently. I think we've been out as far as maybe, Thousand Oaks.
Yeah.
That's about the furthest we've
That's
been.
about
But
right.
mostly it's, you know, L.A. and Orange County. And we've been as far as Victorville and down towards San Clemente and even Riverside, San Bernardino. I went back to my old schools, like where I...
Oh, did
San
you?
Bernardino, that was a thrill.
That'd be fun, wouldn't it?
You know, there was even one of the teachers still there back the first time I went, Mr. Bone. He was still there,
Still there.
which was great. So, anyway, great career, really blessed, lucky.
Amazing. That's a very, very interesting story, and a real pleasure to talk with you, Chuck. We've had a lot of background noise here. People listening to this recording may wonder what's been going on, but as I mentioned earlier, we're speaking from the Toluca Lake Tennis Club in a private, in a public part of the facility, and there's been a lot of people in and out. Hopefully, not interrupting what Chuck has been talking about, because it's really been fascinating. We've been speaking with Commander Chuck Street, a member of Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters, as a matter of fact, on the board of directors. And this has been recorded at, as I say, the Toluca Lake Tennis Club on October 5th, 2009. This is Jerry Fry, audio historian for Pacific Pioneer Broadcasters, thanking you for listening. Chuck, it's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Maybe it's just as well you can't get that. If there's anything I could be prosecuted for.
Nothing at all. No problem.